to shift gears now and talk about the hot fintech space. We've seen a lot of money coming into this space the last year. India's digital highways, India's virtual highways are, of course, a moment of pride, a Rise with India moment, as we call it here. And RBI, realizing the times we are in and to keep pace with it all, has set up a Fintech department. It's a story that we actually broke on Sunday. We broke it on our social media platforms, and we're going to take it forward now. So what RBI has done in an internal circular, which has been accessed by ET Now, is set up a new fintech department, which is not only going to look at innovation, but also be in charge of all kind of regulations, including with other regulatory bodies. So it's pretty much to keep up with the times. The question is that India's fintech story has matured to this level without needing innovation from the RBI. So is that needed? What kind of innovation can the RBI spur? What kind of regulations could be in the offing? We're going to discuss that and more with the newly minted unicorn, which is Slice, with the founder CEO Rajan Bajaj joining us live here on the market. Rajan, Happy New Year. Many thanks for joining us today live. Fintech, such a hot space. I remember Bill Gates in the 1990s was saying we may not need banks, we're going to need banking. Let's see how that prophecy turns out to be. But just the way the fintechs have been maturing, growing in size, getting the kind of customer base they have been, it's a recognition from the RBI as well that fintech is not just payments.
Happy New Year, Nantara. Thanks for having me here. Absolutely, that's what it is. We have such a proactive regulator that they themselves are busy even on a Sunday, and they keep you and me busy. You broke the news obviously yesterday. And we all know that the regulators have always been proactive, and that has led to success of not just the fintech sector, but financial services sector in India. But what this also shows is that the regulator is probably ahead of the curve when it comes to global regulators in proactively going after fintech as a segment, understanding the importance and trying to now regulate that as well.
Okay, so will it also mean that regulations could be coming? But Rajan, I want to ask you one question before we go into that, because today when we talk about fintech, a lot of the mind space, head space, conversation is being dominated right now by what's happening between Ashneer Grover, the founder of Bharatpe, and Kotak Bank on the other hand. Late evening on Sunday, Kotak Bank has come out with a statement confirming that yes, Ashneer Grover did file a lawsuit. They've replied to it. They've already objected to, objectionable language that was used by Ashneer Grover, and they are pursuing legal action as well. So before we go any further, when we talk about fintech, the need to spur innovation, it seems like we also need to return to the basics and have a mature ecosystem and talk about the culture as well. Should RBI get into the culture at fintechs?
So I'll leave aside the specific issue, but because I think it's best handled between both the companies involved. But specifically on culture, let's take a step back from fintech itself, right? Culture at startups also. The way you build culture at startups is not by telling your team that, hey, these are the set of principles and these are the set of values that you need to adhere to, and that's our culture. It's when people believe in that from within themselves, that this is a shared mission that they all believe in and they all want to work towards. And it's that curiosity and passion that comes with that mission. That passion itself becomes your culture, right? So rather than trying to force and start, putting policies on the culture, I think it's up to us, the people involved in startups, people involved in fintech, to just have a shared mission and understand what are you working toward, what's the purpose, and that becomes your culture. That passion with which you work on your companies become your culture, and you self-regulate.
So tell me one thing now, when a fintech department is going to be there, the RBI being chaired by a newly promoted executive director as well, what should we all be thinking? That regulations for fintechs is just a matter of time? And there are a lot of people who believe that regulations can be bad, but there are issues, right? Not everybody has is can be painted with the same brush. So as fintech picks up, as millennials start taking credit, as loan recovery becomes harder as well, and we've seen the kind of practices that are coming in. What kind of regulations are you folks expecting from the RBI?
So first of all, I think it's a great recognition of the sector itself. When I started working on slides back in 2016, fintech was still not known, in India in general. It was just an up-and-coming sector, which not many people believe that it's going to be where it is now 5 years later with the advent of Geo, the internet, UPI, and where we have reached. No one could have believed, I think, 5-6 years back. It has already become large. But I think from here on, the journey is still very, very early. So it's important that there are the right regulations in place because they protect the consumer interest, which is very important for any sector to be able to reach its potential, to be able to scale. And I think it's a good time to have a department. It's a great move, I think. Because our journey is not an iterative growth journey from here for the next 5 years. I think we still have the potential to grow 20x, 30x, 100x from here over the next 5 to 10 years. And we can't imagine where we will be 5 to 10 years down the line. So it's a great time to have those regulations. I think it's important to have some constraints whenever you're designing something. Because without constraints, sometimes the best outcomes will never happen because it could turn into lawlessness and all sorts of things. So it's important that you build within those constraints. Innovation will happen within those constraints. I think it's a great time to put those constraints.
Rajan, one of the factors that has determined the success of fintechs, and I'm talking about quite a few companies that have popped up over the last 4 or 5 years, is the kind of funding that has come in. And there is an expectation, there is an implicit understanding that there will be a certain amount of growth. With regulations coming in, do you think that will get shifted, that expectation will have to shift as well? And do you think that the incumbents have a bigger advantage over companies that are starting up now?
Not really. I think for any business owner, or for that matter, investors also, clarity is one of the most important things when they're working in a regulated sector. So with this department, some of the things that are written in that notice circular that is being floating around is that you can, it seems like you can have a clear channel of communication with the regulator. And that's a great thing for some of the fintechs out there because they were already working with the regulated entities, but they had to go to the regulator through those regulated entities. This gives them an option to directly start communicating with the regulator, hopefully. And that will provide further more clarity. And clarity is very important for running a business in this sector. I think it's going to be very positive for the sector, for the investors, for the business involved.
So especially for fintechs that are getting into the lending space, there might at some point be a requirement for capital adequacy to be maintained. Do you see that as a challenge at all, or do you think that money is that fintechs are flush with money, that will never be a problem?
Right. Capital adequacy is anyways a regulatory requirement, and it's again a requirement that protects the interest of the customer. Like I said, anything that protects the interest of the customer is great for the business also, because that helps the business scale from where we are in India today. That's not the peak scale where we can be, right? Our potential is to go 100x from here also in the next 10 years. So some of these regulations were already there because most of the fintechs, also in the credit space, were working with a regulated entity and the regulations applied on them. We'll have to see what RBI does with the fintech department specifically to capital adequacy. That is something that is not written in the circular that's been floating around, so I can't really comment on that. But I believe that any sort of regulation that protects customer interest will be very beneficial for the sector.
So Rajan, as we wind down the interview, you're clearly welcoming this move for the Fintech department to be set up by the RBI. You genuinely believe, it seems from what you're saying, can help in innovation and bring about clarity as well on how fintechs should be run as well as governed. What should be the scope of regulations? Because, this is also supposed to be innovative. It's supposed to be disruptive. Like, I don't think many of us have ever imagined that, 21-year-olds would be taking loans. Should these 21-year-olds be taking loans without having any credit history? So what should be the scope? Look at the way buy now, pay later, for example, is picking up. We may even start seeing lending on UPI. So what should be the scope?
I think that's for the regulator to decide on what should be the scope. But we have very good examples across the world. There have been some very large fintech companies being built globally. India is, I think, in a very early phase when it comes to fintech. So a lot of companies to learn from, a lot of geographies and their regulators to see what they have done and learn from their mistakes, and also learn from the good things that they have done and maybe apply the best practices like we have done with UPI in India. By the way, that also comes with a department like NPCI, right? Which strictly is not regulated, but it's also being run by a company which was put under constraints. And that's why you saw this huge disruption that happened to payments in India. So why not also learn from some of the best countries and some of the best companies across the world and apply the best policies here in that department?
How all of this pans out. Rajan, thanks so much for joining us live today here on The Market. It's a big news, a story we broke here on Sunday evening, a fintech department being set up by the Reserve Bank of India, clearly to keep pace with the times that we are in. It's one of the hottest spaces that we have in the startup universe as well. And let's see what the scope of the regulations will be. And it's going to be interesting because, it's a space which is known as a massive disruptor. So will the space also keep disrupting whatever it is that the RBI wants to regulate? But for now, the fintech industry is seeming to be very happy that the RBI has taken cognizance of this. There are many fintechs also which have banking ambitions too. So let's see how all of this pans out.